I'm not sure for how long you've known Jesse, and I hope you don't mind me bringing him in the picture because that's where my introduction of you first came in. So I was hoping you can just provide some insight about how you guys came to each other's path here, and then develop the relationship that you guys have up to this point.
Jesse and I met back, I have to say, 30 years ago. And we were introduced by a producer friend named Tracy Paddock. And Jesse was doing stunts and wanted to start directing himself. And he was a very young man. I'd say he was still a teenager when I met him. So,
Okay.
And I wasn't that far ahead of him. So yeah, we met through Tracy Paddock, and she ended up being a terrific asset for me in my career. She gave me my first opportunity to do a TV series, and it was for Showtime, called Women, Stories of Passion. But anyway, so that introduction was made through Tracy, and Jesse and I have been good buddies ever since. I loved it when I met him. He rolled up on an old green Honda, I think, motorcycle, and he had those, very British looking motorcycle goggles with the green lenses, and he looked very rugged and just the type of guy I would get along with. So, adventurous and rugged.
What was it about him that, I mean, you mentioned before you guys hit off the ground, but what was it about him that you connected with, that you realized that you could see yourself not just becoming friends with him, but also in a working capacity to work, to the point where you are with it now? Like, what was that realization for you when you first came across with him?
Well, he very quickly had an idea for a short film, or I believe it was a teaser for a feature film that he wanted to do. And he asked if I would score that. At that time, I was writing for soap operas and hadn't done, I had done my first film, which was Scorpion. But at this point, I was focusing on my soap opera work. And I'd been doing some television work as well, but mostly the soaps at that time. So he had a great teaser idea called The Hunted, I believe it was called. And he shot it beautifully. It was shot in 35 millimeter. And I ended up doing the score for this teaser for him. And that's the first time we worked together. It was, I don't know, could have been 93, something like that.
Oh, was that long ago? So, wow.
Yeah. And then that relationship grew from there, and we remained friends. And when he got his first real feature, which was called The Doorman, with Dominic Vandenberg, that was the first full-length film that we did together. And I really enjoyed working on that with him. And we did a really interesting, it was a very visceral, beautiful movie. There was some romance in it as well, but boy, there was some intense violence and intense action. So
yeah,
I
think that's one of the very few films of his I have not seen. I have a hard time finding that movie for me to get access to for some reason these days. So I was actually really curious about how when obviously you've been working for a number of years prior to meeting Jesse, because I know I've heard you mention before in the past that you were working on several, you worked on your first feature film, and then you had worked on several student projects and short films and things of that nature throughout the years. And then eventually you ended up getting a gig working on television. I think at one point you had mentioned one of the shows that you were working on was, if I recall correctly, was Dragon Master. Is that correct? The cartoon show?
Close. That was the Savage Dragon.
Savage Dragon. Thank you. So
Savage Dragon was really, that was an Eric Larson comic book that they made into a show for USA Network, and that was action packed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so in working on that though, and then I think from there, if I recall correctly, you transitioned into getting into soap opera, which you've done, I think you mentioned for 3 years, and that was actually quite a bit of an experience for you, because it seems like with what you were able to develop for the music, if I recall correctly, it's still being used, I think, to this day. Is that a fair assessment to make about what you had mentioned before in the past?
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So
yeah, that the soap work was actually before
Oh, okay.
the TV series.
Gotcha.
The Savage Dragon before. Savage Dragon was my second show. First one was the Showtime series, Women.
Gotcha. So, and did you also do any filming
Yeah.
working on that as well too, or because I thought if I heard correctly, I thought I heard that you had said that you had done some production work on that show as well too. Is that correct as well?
No, no,
Oh, okay, then I misheard that.
that was no. I didn't do any death scene cameos in that. That didn't start happening until Jesse started killing me in his movies.
Well, I was actually really curious to also speak with you because you come from a perspective that I think is something that I've always wanted to hear people in the industry, in this case for a composer, because one of the things that I've learned as the years have gone by is that I'm very much invested with like actors who've been going through the grind and having to find the next job, and especially if there's a certain level of actors who are able to be in a position where the jobs are given to them and they can just decline the work. But I understand for certain composers, I think I would imagine for a majority of them, that it's more or less kind of the same process here. So I understand that when you were first had started showing interest in working on film, from what you have seen when you were a young age working with your father, that was more or less a turning point for you. But then as the years have gone by, I was always curious to hear what your perspective was once you started to work in the industry, and realizing that the amount of work that's involved with it and the amount of I'm not sure if you would comment on it, but like some of the more political aspect as well too, that there is knowing the right people can get you into the right door, but also if what the competitive nature is in that particular field for composers, that may differ from, say, for an example, like an actor or director. So I was hoping that you can also elaborate on that too, to see how your experience has been since you continue on working in the industry.
What it's just been a matter of, I have to admit that much of the work comes from people that you've obviously established relationships with. And I get a lot of repeat employers. So if you do a good job for somebody on a film and you gel with them personally and creatively. Sorry, I got my gardeners right outside my studio at the moment.
It's all good.
But yeah, so you develop a rapport, a relationship. You do a good job with one director, and you're able to communicate creatively. They tend to keep coming back to you. So that's been the way that I've been able to continue and grow my career. And then I've met, it's mostly directors that have been responsible for the work. Sometimes producers, but yeah, I believe one of the producers I worked for, Manuel Corby, with Dream Tim, he came to me through another producer that I had worked for. So that was the rare occasion where it was producer to producer. And, they always tend to lead to other things. The Dream Tim projects I did with Sony Pictures, we did 8 or 9 with Brian Gores directing and Manuel Corby producing. But that led to my relationship with Alexander Nevsky, the Russian film star and producer, who I'm working with now as a co-producer. And we are in the process of putting our 3rd film together. So, yeah, I had done a season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and my brother-in-law, who is lead artist on True Crime, had told the head of the studio, Lexaflux, that I was doing some cool work. I'd done Buffy and a bunch of other films, other series, and he was a fan of Buffy. So I was asked to come in and meet with Peter, the head of Lexaflux, and we kind of hit it off. And what was fun is they had a few composers do a couple of cinematic scenes as an audition.
Yeah.
And it was very democratic. He had the whole studio vote on which composer they thought was the best for the gig. And I was lucky enough to get that. Now, in getting that one, that led to other work. Activision ended up buying True Crime, and then we did True Crime Streets, of New York City. And then my relationship with the sound department there led to my work with Treyarch. Some of the guys went on to work for Treyarch and Call of Duty. And that's how I got into Call of Duty. I was able to, do that fantastic World War II one, Call of Duty World at War, which then led to Call of Duty Black Ops. And so all of these relationships, it's just odd sometimes how you luck into something. But if you do good work, and you're cool enough for them to want to hang out with, then it tends
Well,
to
I was
keep
gonna
going
ask
along.
you about the composing the music for video games because I'm sure you understand the actual process and what it takes to make a video game where you have all these different variations of like player modes and whatnot. And I think I heard you before in the past discuss about how you were able to kind of just find a way to be able to compose certain sequences to fit certain events and then style of play. Was that difficult for you in the beginning to do that? Because considering that, when you watch a movie and you're composing for a film, it's pretty much structured right in front of you. Whereas a video games, it's kind of all over the place, considering the different players and the situations that they're in. So was that something that was difficult to adapt to, or was it a rather easy process than you may have thought it would have been?
It's very much the same as writing for film. I love writing for film because you pick a start and an end with your director, where you want the scene to start and where you want it to end, and what you want to achieve in that scene. So I don't know. I find that film music kind of almost writes itself in a way, because I'm constantly watching the scene and listening to the actors, the timbre, the tone of their voice, their rhythm, and that kind of dictates what you do. Now, what I ended up doing with the video games, I started in the true crime games with the cinematics, writing the cinematic scenes, which are cut scenes. So it's just like writing for film. And then, I would take those cut scenes and then extend them and just make longer musical pieces that could be used in gameplay. But there was very little of that in true crime because they licensed so many songs. I mean, it was just like you get in that car and you were listening to, all the hip hop from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. But now with Call of Duty, I would start with some cut scenes as well and develop some themes. And then I would get them to give me gameplay. Just give me some random long gameplay so I could compose to that like I would to a film. And then if there's I made it so you could have drastic changes depending on if something blew up in front of you, and then choose a relative key, but change the action. Maybe you would go a lot faster for that transition. But it was a lot of mix and match and a lot of experimentation, and we were trying new things with 5.1 surround as well. So we're trying some new technologies and new ways of activating different musical pieces, but very, very similar to writing for film. Very much so.
Would you say that when you're composing your music together, that is it easier for you to kind of get, if you have an idea of, like, for example, like if they're telling you Black Ops or Call anything, if they're giving you a specific type of genre for a game, do you already have it in mind? Okay, so I think I might lean more something to this effect here, or until I see it, and once I get an image, I have an idea what I'm gonna be going with as far as the tone of the music is concerned. Does it come that easy for you to kind of put it together prior to actually putting it together, or does it actually come out more easier for you as you started putting together once you're in the studio and putting all the music together bit by bit?
Once you get a few themes together, it's easier to come up with more themes that are inspired by what you've done before. Particularly in Black Ops, I was going for a kind of a mid-century, mid-20th, 21st century kind of sound from the 50s and 60s, the Cold War era. Some of the great composers from that time, like Kurtog and Pendrecki, some really other avant-garde Cold War composers. So that's what I used as kind of my template of what I wanted to start from.
Oh, okay.
And putting that into a more modern kind of action context was an interesting thing to do, but using some of those very wild string techniques that were used in Penderecki pieces and Kurtog pieces.
Gotcha.
And yeah, so it was wonderful having the resources to record all of these wild effects, whether they be percussion effects, horn effects, string effects. We had a lot of time in the studio, over a week at Warner Brothers on the Clint Eastwood scoring stage there. Man,
Yeah.
7 days. It was unheard of for a
So
video game project.
what's the turnaround time? What's the average turnaround time for you to compose a score for a video game from start to finish and have it finalized once you get to that point?
Well, both Call of Duty and Black Ops I worked on for around 11 months on each one of those.
Okay, so 11 months from
11 months with no ghostwriters. So
okay,
it was all me. Yeah.
But so when you're composing this, so because I guess I'm confused with how you meant it, so I hope you can clarify for me. So you have 11 months and you're working from start to finish for that one game, and then you mentioned before you have 7 days to actually compose it. So it's 11 months to come up with the music, and then 7 days to actually record it and get everything finalized. Is that
that was 7 days with actual 80-piece orchestra.
Gotcha. I see.
So
Okay.
all of my synthesizer mock-ups of orchestral stuff was then replaced with real orchestra and combined together with my synth tracks as well.
Oh, okay.
But, so yeah, 11 months. There was over 3.5 hours of music for both of those projects, I believe. So that was quite a lot of work. But now for motion pictures, my turnaround time is between usually 4 and 6 weeks to record everything and record and master everything. Yeah, usually 4 to 6 weeks, which is relatively, for usually you're writing around 70 minutes of music. 72 minutes seems to be a number that pops up a lot. And yeah, so that's usually between 4 and 6 weeks. I like 6 weeks. That's like my sweet spot. And that's about the amount of time it takes for the post-production sound guys to work. From the time they get their master cut and they get all their sound effects, Foley, ADR done, it usually takes them 6 to 7 weeks. So usually I'll come in a little ahead of the sound guys, which is good. I'd rather be early than late.
So
you don't want to have them waiting around for the music.
Do you get like so when you're hired to compose for a movie, are you aware as far as like what it is you're working on, as far as like getting footages of the film that you're going to be working on, so that way you have an idea of what it is you're going to be starting off with to start writing the music down, or you have to wait till they're completely done with the production and then you're going to start seeing how little by little the film is being put together for you to start compositing it as it goes along the way?
Well, you know what? It depends on what you think you're going to have as far as a schedule. Now, the last film that I worked on with Jesse Johnson, White Elephant, there was going to be a very quick turnaround times on the sound. From the time that cut had a final cut, from the time you had a final cut on that one, it was going to be a quick turnaround. So I actually on that one started working off of their rough cut and got some of the major themes done and ready to go. So by the time we had our final tweaks and our final cut, I think I wrote at least 2/3 of the score already. So now that can throw off some of the cues when you change the length of something or change the sequence of a gun battle. And then it's just a matter of going back to your sessions and doing some edits or rewriting a particular section if it was changed a lot. But usually you can easily get away, find a way to get it edited and working with the final cut. But usually I like to wait for the final cut so you don't have to mess around with recomposing or editing your material.
Have you ever been in a position where you wrote a score and then you have it recorded and then you realize it's not as good as I thought it was, so therefore you had to go back and redo it all over again from scratch? Has that ever happened to you at all at any point for any of the films or
Yeah.
video games you worked on?
Yeah, I wrote a beautiful piece for which one was it? Oh, it was the last one, Hell Hath No Fury. And it was a beautiful opening sequence for the film. And Jesse and I ended up watching it together, just judging from his reaction and then my reaction. I realized, no, man, this is all wrong. It was way too beautiful and way too romantic. So it needed to be rewritten. We both realized it in the studio. And I said, you know what? I don't like it. And then he said, yeah, it's just not quite, it's just too pretty. And so we went completely the opposite direction. But as a composer, you know what? If something's not working for your creative head, you got to throw your ego away and just go, you know what, dude, let's try something else. And that's the way I like doing it. So if I see the body language on my director and I can tell they're not quite feeling it, then I'm like, no, start over.
So you're actually okay even if you work on a score and you put a lot of work and effort into it and you love it, and you're actually okay with somebody saying, I didn't like it, doesn't fit well with the scene, you're able to just go, all right, no worries, what do you want me to do, and to change it up, or I have another idea to do. That's easy for you to do.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't get married to it. Don't get married to it. Look, if it's not working for the person who wrote the film and directed the film, then that's what I care about. And of course, I'm always going to make it work for the film.
Right.
But I'm more interested in fulfilling, making their vision come to life than, if I fall in love with a piece of music. I've written so much music,
right,
probably thousands of hours. I can deal with making changes.
But where did you start? Where did you learn to do that? I mean, because I'm curious, did you learn to approach it that way early on, or was that something you figured out as you continued on with your career composing music for directors and in other different productions as well too?
You know what? I have to admit, early on in my career, I made the mistake of pushing back on a particular piece of music, and the pushback didn't serve me well. So it just pissed off my director, and I just decided after that, you know what? It's not worth the hassle. If somebody is, pushing back on a piece of music, just change it. So
interesting.
I learned that pretty early on.
But have you ever come to a point where so for example, like, and if you look at you worked on this on a composition, and then you have it on the you're putting it into the scene, and you believe that it works, and this is good, I like this, I know this works well, but the director says I don't like it. Is there ever any point, even up to this day, where you realize, you know what, I think it does work, let me show you why I think it works? Nothing like that, where you really are just going to be completely just saying, all right, if it doesn't work for you, I will commit to that. But
No.
there's not a single point in time where you feel like, trust me, it does work, and I'll explain why. Nothing at all.
No.
Okay.
Don't ever explain. Don't ever tell somebody why they should like it. They should just like it.
I see.
And you know what? Often, if for example, Jesse always has input, and he'll come up with, can you do something here? I really want to emphasize this look. I really want to emphasize this reaction. And can you give me something there? I say, oh, absolutely. And then it makes you look at it from a different perspective. And you go, oh, cool. Usually, I would say, 98% of the time, changes suggested always make the score better.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But what about the other 10% time that doesn't work?
Yeah, from my perspective, but yeah, don't get married to anything.
Well, so okay, so let me ask you about this here because I'm curious about how easy it is for you. Well, let me take a step back here. There's actually another question I wanted to ask you. I'm sure that there are times where you think of a tune and then you start working it out and you record it and you say, I like the way this sounds. I may use it for something down the line. Do you ever pull anything out of the box that for a project that you may be working on and say, if the film is going to be dealing with this, I have this theme in mind that may work well with it, test it out, and it may actually work into the favor of the film, or I'm going to put it away because it doesn't work. So I'll save it for another project that may work with it. Anything like that comes along the way too?
Yes, this main piece that I wrote for Hell Hath No Fury did not work at all. So I said, we'll use it in something else. And then we ended up using it in a Italian restaurant scene in White Elephant in our next film. Because it's very classical. It had a beautiful soprano voice and it worked perfectly in this Italian scene.
Interesting.
So, but here's one that was kind of fun. A lot of the time I'll just be driving and come up with a theme and record it on my phone. It'll pop in my head. The theme for Avengement came that way. My daughter was sitting in the seat next to me when I hummed out that theme. Or sometimes, I'll be taking a shower and a theme pops into my head. So the Western film that I co-produced and just finished the score on, I don't know if you can see in the background there.
Yeah, I can see you.
There you go.
What was the name of this project that you're working on right now? Because I think I saw in your post. I just can't recall the name of the picture.
It's called Assault on Rio Bravo.
That's right. Okay.
So I had this theme. I recorded it on the phone. Thought, oh my God, this is going to be perfect. And I started writing it with picture. And man, I just could not make it work at all. I said, oh my God, this is absolutely terrible. This does not work at all. So what often happens is a theme that I wrote for the interior of the film for an action sequence was bold and bombastic and had a great thematic element to it. I said, that's my main title right there. So I took that, expanded on it, and turned it into a big epic 4-minute piece. So sometimes you get surprises like that. You'll start off with something that doesn't work for you, and you just pull something from somewhere else.
I heard you say in the past that you started playing guitar at a young age too. So do you because I'm curious because I imagine you played several different type of instruments, piano, guitar, I would imagine drums too. I think at one point you mentioned you played cello, but then stop and you wish you would have gone back to continue learning that because you love using that instrument on your score. But when you are thinking of a tune, is there a go-to instrument that you like to use as a way to kind of just test out the theme that you're thinking of at that moment, or it's whatever's available? So you say, for example, you use your voice to record this hum that you thought of, and then went back to try to add on to it later on. So how does that process work like for you when you think of something on the spot to get it all out?
You know what? It depends on what type of score you're doing. If I'm doing like an electronica score, I'm going to use a totally different palette of instruments than I'm going to use for this Western, which is very orchestral. So I don't have a whole lot of synthesizer patches and setups all ready to go. For something like Accident Man, that was one of Jesse and Scott Adkins' films.
Yeah.
Was going to be very 80s inspired, Tangerine Dream.
I like that score.
Yeah, Barry Dvorak's score for The Warriors, that came to mind. Yeah. So I had a palette of electronic instruments that I would go to start and come up with themes with. But yeah, you use different colors and different palettes depending on what you're working on. If I'm doing something, that's more orchestral, usually start on the piano to come up with the melodies and thematic ideas. But I love cello, so I'm always writing for cello. That's one of my favorite instruments, and I have a couple of great players that I work with. And even I had my daughter at one point play some cello on when she was still playing.
So, but let me ask you about this other aspect of the putting everything together. Is there, because you've worked in the industry for years now, and I would imagine you've seen a lot of you definitely have seen a lot of how putting music together has changed throughout the years, especially with technology coming into play. But is there an aspect of writing the music or putting the music together, scoring the music, whatever the case may be, that may have changed for you before, where you may have liked it or and love it more, or may have loved it, don't like it anymore now, but it's it's part of the course, you must do it. Is there anything along the way that for you has changed about how you like to go about doing doing what you're doing now that has changed before, for better or for worse?
Well, it's interesting. When I started, it's like 1984. Synthesizers just developed the MIDI interface, so you could really hook all these instruments together and layer them. And you also had the ability to sync to video using SMPTE time code. So it really hasn't changed that much. Once you could sync to video, you can just keep rewinding and going over your scene. It's a lot faster now because you don't have to wait for your tape to rewind.
Yeah.
And because everything is, you've got the video clip up in your DAW, your digital recording device, and you got, tapes on, you got the tape on Pro Tools as well. So it's very quick access, and you can quickly go back. But, maybe back then when I was working off a tape, I was on tape all through Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We were actually mastering to digital tape at that time. My very first movie was mastered to a 2-track, and they used what was called magnetic film back then to put all of the audio tracks on it. So that's completely different from where everything has gone. But delivering in Pro Tools is, just so much easier than delivering on a tape that then had to be synced up or transferred to Pro Tools. But yeah, it's a little faster now than it was in the beginning. But I tell you, because I started right at the cusp of MIDI and computers, my very first computer that I used with the synthesizers was a Commodore 64.
Oh, I remember
And
those.
and what was so cool about that? It actually had a MIDI interface that was easily inserted by the game card.
Yeah.
And then my second computer was an Atari computer that had MIDI built in. And
I'm surprised I still remember this, but yeah, you're right. I do remember that. Yeah. Interesting.
Still sitting in my closet. And I used a program called SMPTE Track. So it was just very easy to sync and work with video. And when I got enough money, I got a 3/4 inch video machine that, had a scroll knob on it. That was a lot easier to work with than a VHS with a remote control. So, but yeah, just working with video clips, it goes so much faster now. So I probably work less hours in a day than I used to.
Okay.
And I've just gotten a lot faster with writing. It doesn't take me as long as it did, 20 years ago to come up with something and feel confident with it. So now it's just like boom, bam, just work. And I get very incredibly focused. I'll sit here in this studio and 6 hours will go by and I'm like, wow, man, I've got 3 minutes of music done already. So.
What for you though, what's actually the most challenging part of putting the music together, whether it be, the writing process, recording process? What's the most difficult process for you now, as you're, putting everything together for the film or whatever project you may be working on?
When my shit stops working, when a computer goes down, or when the mixing board fucks up, or messes up. Sorry.
You can cuss.
Yeah,
I cuss too.
I had a problem this morning with my beautiful Mackie digital mixing board that I've had since '99. So for 23 years, Sometimes it doesn't turn on, so you got to actually give it a little smack here and there. Smack the power box on it. So yeah, that's the frustrating part, is when you turn off your computers for a few days and for some reason they don't want to work. And unfortunately, I know way too much about computers and changing motherboards and changing hard drives and memory. I know way more than I should need to know about keeping your computers running. But that's part of electronic music, is knowing how to do that. So it becomes an advantage after a while. I'll tend to know what's wrong with the computer. Oh, the power supply is gone, or the motherboard is messed up. So
Interesting.
yeah,
So
there's a lot of technical stuff that goes along with this, and then getting your sample libraries to work, and key cards and passcodes, and oh my God, it's just a lot of stuff.
well, you know, when you are as you're coming up with, as you're putting everything together and you're seeing the final product, like for example, let's go back to Hell Hath No Fear here, because you know, I talked to Catherine Lee McHugh, and I think she, if I remember in the conversation, she had mentioned that you guys were looking at a cut of the film, I believe at your home, if I recall her saying correctly, where I think obviously Jesse was there, I believe Nina was there, Catherine, and a few other people, including yourself, and you guys were watching a cut of the film that included the music. So when you're watching, you know, what you've done so far, um are you, I know you said you're not married to the music, but as you're watching it and listening to how everything is being put together there, do you get some sort of like satisfaction out of that, or are you still one in that part of the phase where, you know, it's not, I'm not committed to that just yet, I like where it's going so far, therefore I know that I'm going to tweak some things along the way, or are you just immersed with what you're hearing and seeing, and then you go back to the drawing board if need be?
Yeah, that's exactly the process. But I enjoy it. I love showing the clients for the first time the score. And for someone like Kat, when she came over, she had not seen any of the or heard any of the original score for it. And Jesse and I had pretty much finished working on it at that point. So it was great to get her reaction to it emotionally the first time. She, it's a pretty powerful film. So when you have some of those really emotional pieces of music, it really brings things together. So yeah, I love getting reactions. But usually, if anyone else sees it, it's after the director and I have done our work on it.
I see. How do you personally handle criticism when it comes to, you know, after the film is done or the video game has been done and it's been released into the public? If you know, because some people will say I love the score and some people will say I don't love it. How do you personally handle that, or do you not look into that at all? Because you just put the project out there and then you move on to the next one and don't even think twice about what the general consensus is for whatever it is you just worked on there. Did you have an approach how you handle that for yourself?
Or you know what? If anyone mentions the score, it's usually in a positive light because it
Right.
made some kind of impact on them, unless you've written something so horrible that it's really distracting. The only time I really hear bad things about scores is if, wow, man, that music was just so distracting. And as far as critiques of my material, I don't know. I don't read. I'll have my directors or producers send me the good articles, and if they mention the music, send it my way. But no, I haven't really read anything that ever made me want to run and hide. So not yet. We'll see.
So, but do you think though that you know, within, you know, because you hear the you know, Jesse, because I actually had communicated with Jesse not too long ago, where, you know, Hell Hath a Fury was getting well received, but obviously there have been some people who have said otherwise, which, you know, I understand people have their thoughts on the film and I get that, but hearing, you know, that perspective of like the film that you guys worked on, that you guys clearly have worked very hard on, and, you know, Hell Hath no Fear being you know, I've said before in the review that I think this is his best film he's ever done so far. But when you hear people saying something about the film, not necessarily the music, but the film in general that you were a part of as well too, do you take a little bit of that as well too, and hear what people are saying in respect to the film, or you're just solely focused on if they don't say anything about the music, then I'm okay in that area.
No, I like to see good reviews of the
Right.
films. Yeah, I'm more interested in seeing a good review of the movie than any mentions of my music.
Okay.
I really don't care that much about that. It's nice when you do get a good mention, but when you see a film that's unfairly attacked, look, you have a lot of reviewers that are known for just being brutal and kind of that's their thing.
Yeah.
Maybe frustrated filmmakers that take out their animus on other people
Yeah.
that are doing work that they wish they were doing. I don't know, but when when you're working on a lower budget film, you always expect that, oh my God, you might get some critiques on the budget and the size of it. But usually, if it's a good movie, you're going to get people are going to respond, and enough people that are reviewing are going to respond.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love a good review of the film and a good mention of music. It's pretty cool too.
When you are now not when you're not working on your music, and you're actually not thinking of anything, or what will be the next theme that you could possibly be working on. I noticed on your posts on your social media that you're pretty much an outdoors guy. That's kind of the impression that I got off of you, from what you may post on your Instagram account. Is there something that you do outside of music that kind of helps fulfill that creative side of yourself, to help in some ways maybe complement when you go back into the studio to make another set of to make more music that will actually help, yeah, to help with that as well. I'm hoping I asked the question correct because it worked better in my head, but I'm
No,
hoping you understand.
I love being around horses. We have a
Right.
wonderful horse. And then working on the Westerns too, I've had an opportunity to ride a little bit more doing that. But I love spending time with my daughter with at the ranch where we keep the horse. It's a wonderful escape from the studio. And I spend a lot of time. I'm out there 3-4 times a week for
Interesting.
several hours. That's great. I used to play golf a lot, not as much anymore, but
Why is that for you?
golf.
Hmm.
It just started taking up too much time and getting too frustrating. If you get good, you think you're good for a week, and the next time you go out, you suck badly. So
Yeah.
it's just I rather hang around the horses than getting out on the greens
So
these
do you
days.
own quite a few horses at your ranch there, or is it one of those ranches where you have people that rent out
Oh, yeah, we have one horse there, and
okay,
I mean, tons of horses out there.
I see.
And yes, my daughter she has a few that she gets to ride, and so I'll take our guy out. And she'll borrow somebody else's horse as well. So it's fun.
So
Gets out the cowboy in you.
but when did you start getting into horses? Or were you always into horses since you growing up here then?
Yeah, I did. In Santa Barbara, my mom had horses, so I started
Okay.
riding when I was maybe 15, 16, something like that.
Really?
The teenager. Yeah.
Interesting. I have my wife's good friend here has a horse because we live out here in North Carolina, and I forgot where exactly the horse is stationed at. But one of the, and maybe you can probably relate to this too, but she was explaining to me the culture that it's involved with being around horses, but then the different subcultures that come with it as well too. Like one of her biggest attractions to film is that if it has a horse, she'll watch. And so films like Secretariat, Seabiscuit, things of that nature, because she's very familiar with that particular field of the industry, having the horses there. Um, so I'm curious with you, because since you are around horses, and I'm genuinely curious because because you happen to mention it, and I know my wife's friend is very invested in it. Um, being around horses, and I hope it doesn't sound like a silly question to ask you, but is there a sense of like calmness that comes with that you get that you probably wouldn't get from something else? Let's say in this case, outside of your music that you would compose, that you would put together here, but is being around the horses for you, does that give you a sense of like tranquility, that you feel at peace with yourself and the surroundings, and with where you are with yourself at that point of your life? I hope it doesn't sound silly to ask you, but I'm genuinely curious, because that
Yeah,
was the
I
reason
like it.
to me.
It's tranquil. it's tranquilo. No, it's nice. It's just I like the nature of our horse. He's a sweet guy, and my daughter's just fantastic with him, and such a great rider. And it's just so pretty out there, you know. And we
Right.
used to have them at the equestrian center here in Burbank, but this one's where we have them now is a much bigger ranch, and the horse gets turned out quite a bit more, has more space to roam around it. So yeah, it's fun. I just like it. Like the
Interesting.
way they smell too.
That's what she said too. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've never been around a lot of horses growing up here, but I mean, when my wife was telling me that, she gave me like this whole backstory about how she got into it, and it blew my mind, like the culture that was behind that there, because I had no idea that it existed. I mean, of course, I knew horses were always around, but it was always just in my peripheral. So, to hear you commented on that, I was curious to hear your perspective on that as well. Okay,
And you know
well,
what? There's a big difference between, you know, like cowboy riders and English saddle riders and the different types of disciplines. Our particular horse is a hunter jumper, so that's a different discipline than say like dressage or roping cattle. So
yeah.
it's
Well, that's
all
what she was
very
telling me too. And again, that's what I didn't know all the different subcultures that come with it, because I just assumed it was all lumped up in one big thing, but that was obviously not the case here. Okay, well, so going back here to with your film here, I actually wanted to just point out a few things that I've come across that you've done that I'm a really big fan of here. So, for example, one of the first films that I had become a fan of with Jesse was from The Debt Collector, and that was where I was introduced to Louis Mandylor, and then I was always a fan of Scott Adkins before, so that was the reason why I was watching the film. But when I go back to revisit the film, and I've seen the movie well over 10 times at this point, but when I go back to watch it, I always like to pick out some things I've never noticed before the first, second, third time around. And one of the biggest things I keep focusing more on, believe it or not, now is the music. And I noticed it also with Debt Collector 2 and then Avengement, which you kind of touched on before. And of course, we talked a little bit about that with Hell Hath No Fury. But for me, I always figured that when you are composing the music for each of those films, obviously you try to give it an identity. But I also feel that there was something that was I always try to pick out from my perspective where you're drawing the themes from that you have written for, say, for example, like Debt Collectors. Like, honestly, for me, I kind of got, and you let me know if I'm wrong, but I always feel like I've got a little bit of like a 70s vibe behind the music that you have start off with the film, and then it slowly start to become a little bit more aggressive along the way as the picture continues, because obviously the action sequences are getting more and more um, are played out in the film, and then obviously you start amping up the score along the way too.
yeah.
So when I'm listening to your music now, I actually have a lot more um I hope this doesn't come up the wrong when I say this, but I have a lot more respect when it comes to compositing music together, because as I'm learning more about what filmmakers go through and putting a film together, and then I was interested in talking to you to hear your perspective on how what it goes through, what you have to go through, meant to put the music together with the film, and then having all these different people's opinions that will come along the way to kind of finalize the cut of the film. Um, I don't know if it's very difficult for you to learning to have to adapt to the constant changes that will come along the way, because I know you've been through this before on more than one occasion. But is there, do you ever go back to listen to some of the previous work that you've done before and reflect on what was going through through your head at that time, and how you felt like, okay, I thought this was a good idea at the time, but now I'm listening to it again, I probably would have changed something a little bit different now, considering what I know today, where I didn't know at that time. Anything like that come to mind for yourself?
God, you know what? Those two movies, I really dig what we did with that. I kind of tried to. I thought the films had kind of a '70s look to the way they were shot,
Mhm.
the way Jonathan Hall shot them, the kind of lenses that he used. Kind of had this really nice '70s vibe to it. So I wanted to do something with the music and the themes that had a little bit of uh, some interesting scores from the '70s. And we even used a little influence by some Kurosawa films, the Japanese films that Jesse is a big fan of. So I used some of the instruments, but tried to incorporate them into kind of a 70s vibe and a 70s groove with the kind of drum patterns that I used. Now, as far as looking back, you know what? I tend not to look back at films that I've done, 10, 15 years ago. Technology's changed. The sounds have gotten better.
Right.
I don't know. I'd probably dig them. There's a couple of scores that I did early 2000s that are actually pretty cool. Oh, and actually, one of my favorite scores to listen to is The Doorman from '99 with Jesse. Mm-hmm. That score was really interesting. So I actually drew on some of that for some of the things that we did in White Elephant.
So with the score that I actually really felt that I've connected with the most with you was Hell Hath No Fury. That score to me was like from what I've picked up before of the films that I've seen you've worked on, especially with Jesse. I don't know if it's a fair thing to say because I haven't heard every score that you have done so far, because I know you have years and years of work. But to me, from what I can recall, from what I've listened to so far, Hell Hath No Fury, in my opinion, was the best score that I've heard you've done up to this point.
That's awesome. Appreciate that.
No, I really do mean that too. One of the reasons why I felt like it was one of your best was because I always feel like I'm always more attracted to like the subtle scores, like the ones that you notice are in the background, but it's not overtaking the scene. As you relate, the music kind of complements the scene more than anything. I felt a lot of that in this movie, and I've seen this movie, and this is no joke, because I really did see the film over 20 times, because every single time I go back and watch the movie, I always pick more and more things about what I liked about the films, and I always go back to listening to the music, because at that point, I've already seen the film so many times to the point where I can just listen to the music, and that's all I need to focus on, because I found that to be very soothing in a lot of ways. So, for you, I'm not sure if when you were taking on this particular project, because this was something that I remember when I talked to Jesse last year. No, I'm sorry. I take that back. Not last year. I meant to say in 2020. He was still shooting Hell Hath No Fury at that time. And, this was a film that he kind of, I wouldn't say he hyped, but he definitely was saying it's a really special project for him. It was a secret World War II project. So I was already anticipating the film once he kind of talked about that project to that extent. And then having the film be released when I saw the trailer, I saw the trailer first, and then I watched the movie. I was genuinely blown away with the film, because everything that I had imagined that he was going to do with that movie, he accomplished it, in my opinion. Of course, with everyone else working the movie too, with the actors, your music, the editing, the special effects, things of that nature. All that, in my opinion, worked very effectively for me personally. So I wasn't sure, if this was a project that when Jesse had approached you about this here and say, hey, this is going to be a World War II project, but this is going to be the one. I don't know if it was like that for you when he had talked about it, or it was more like, all right, I got another project you interested in doing. Yeah, sure. Or was it kind of like that approach in working on that project together? Or was there, did you feel like there's something special about that particular movie that you noticed, okay, this is going to be the one for us, that we are going to put our best efforts into it? That you guys weren't doing that before, but yeah, I hope you understand.
Well, yeah, well, he had a script, this French script that he had for a long time, and was dreaming of making it. And the opportunity arose, during COVID, for him to put a very small picture together. And the idea was for it to be small and intimate, but a passion piece. And it was fun. I got to be in some of the shooting as well. I was had a cameo. I played a Nazi that got dragged off into the world.
I saw that. Yeah.
So that was fun. So I felt very connected, because being in the movie and having heard Jesse talk about it for so long, and getting the opportunity at that point to do it. So yeah, and the focus on this was really, for me, and for Jesse is to make a very strong female lead character and a powerful portrayal of an incredibly strong woman. So that was very much on my mind and focus while writing the music. So I want to give this woman, match the power that she's portraying on the screen, and also her vulnerabilities as well, but also the cunningness of her ability to manipulate these men into getting what she wanted. And so there's a cunningness to the score that I tried to work in, a mischievousness that we worked into it. And then there's also some very somber and almost romantic music towards the end of the film. The focus was really, again, on Nina Bergman's character and to bring out the strengths and also the mischievousness and the trickery and the manipulation of the men in the story. And that was one of the main focuses of the music. I also really was inspired by Daniel Bernhardt's performance as well, because being this loathsome, murderous Nazi, he also brought a charm to it, and a sensitivity, because I believe he really loved Marie, and was in love with her to the end and couldn't believe the betrayal. So but the film has so many layers to it, and boy, the shootout scenes are just dynamic and absolutely realistic. The sound design on that film, we spent a lot of time mixing that and getting the guns just right, and it's a really terrific sound mix on that, absolutely top notch.
When you saw the first rough cut of the film, I'm not sure how involved you were in that respect, like seeing that how it evolved throughout the post production. Were you able to see how the film was being put together from the very beginning, or did you come at a certain point during that post production?
Yeah, so having been in it, and I had watched several reshoots and some of the action sequences, so that was very exciting, and that gave me ideas being on set when you saw all these reenactors, these guys with their really accurate Wehrmacht World War II outfits, as well as the Russian soldiers as well. Very inspiring. It gets you in the mood, and nothing like a Tommy gun blasting away and during the scene, and seeing that live is exciting.
Do you when you look back at the movie now, I know you said you don't like to revisit some of your work, well, at least some of your past work at least to a certain point, but is this one of those movies that you would go back to and watch, considering, since you were part of that production and you were there more or less from the beginning? Is this one of those movies that you look back and you can look at and say that was a great experience, that was a great, everything turned out really well, as hard as it was? Because I know Jesse had mentioned before it was a difficult shoot at times, especially for Dominic, because we talked about his experience on the set. But when you're watching the film now, do you look at it in such high regard, or do you look at it as more like it was a great experience, on to the next?
It's one of my favorite films that I've ever done. But our new one, White Elephant, I'm telling you, that is a special film as well, and I can't wait for everyone to see that one. It's got some incredible performances, and the score is completely different from anything I've really ever done, and that's very much Jesse's input and influence. Jesse Johnson has a tremendous impact on the type of music I'll write for his movies. It's completely unique from all of the other directors I've worked with, because we always do something very different, unless we're doing a sequel, of course, like Debt Collector. We shared some of the themes, but we took different approaches with it as well.
Yeah. Are you able to commentate about the movie right now, or is it still kind of hush hush at this very moment for White Elephant?
I think I'll just leave it right where it is right now.
Okay.
Have a release date on it.
Right.
And but it's a terrific film. Really great work by Jesse Johnson.
Got it. Okay.
So
Well,
I think
so
I think you'll enjoy the score as well.
well, I'm looking forward to that movie too. Because when it was announced that he was working on with Malkovich and Willis, and then of Koryenko, and of course missing somebody else here, Rooker, who are all in the movie as well. For me personally, because obviously you know this as well too, knowing Jesse for all these years, that I always felt like that. Jesse's one of those directors that that makes good films, but sometimes they go unnoticed, in my opinion, to some extent. Now, this was the film that I'm hoping, along with Hell Hath No Fury, that would certainly put him out there as like the guy to look out for, and I'm hoping that that will continue from these films he's worked on here. But here's another thing I'm also looking to ask you about. With your career, because you have a pretty long prolific career, from you started at a very young age, and with where you are with yourself now, with the amount of work you've done. um, do you ever consider stepping outside of the scoring music and trying other aspects of the film? I know you mentioned before you've worked on acting into some capacity here in some of the projects here, but because of that, have you ever thought about, maybe I'm going to want to try this instead, because I've had a taste of it and I want to be able to get a little bit more of that, for me to see if I really want to invest into it as I continue? Is there anything like that that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, right now I'm a co-producer and executive producer on co-producer on this western that I just scored.
Right.
So I've gotten into the production side of it. Executive producer on a horror film that we just shot, and I'll be scoring that as soon as we have our final cut on that one. That's coming along nicely,
Yeah.
and then producing two other films after that. One is an action film, and then a sequel to the western. So producing films is just it's come naturally to me because I've been around the film business all of my life, with my dad being an actor and
Right.
being on film sets. So, and having helped to put these deals together has made me feel, a very, it's a very different role, but very natural role for me to take on.
Do you
So
have?
I've
I'm sorry.
always, Robert, I've considered myself a filmmaker as opposed to just a composer.
And what do you mean by
Just because
in that respect?
uh, when I'm writing for a movie, I'm taking it so many aspects of the film into consideration. You have to consider time, budget,
Mhm.
um, so many different things. But I also feel like I'm part of the team, and especially if I get to be in a scene as in a cameo. But yeah, I always feel my role is a filmmaker and not just a composer.
Would you ever consider directing, considering the amount of experience, people you've dealt with, and seeing what they do on their end, to where you thought of like, maybe I might take a stab at that aspect of the industry, as opposed to just going from producer and then moving on to the next phase?
You know what? As far as producing goes, having started off with meetings and coming up with an idea and introducing the director to the producer, watching that whole relationship develop, and to actually move forward into getting the money to do it, and then actually going into production took about 7 or 8 months to go from first idea to actually getting onto a film set, and it was very exciting, very
Mm,
exciting.
interesting. Do you find, now knowing that, now that you actually are partaking the role of producing here, does your perception on actually doing that part of the job change in how you look at the industry, or were you already fully aware of it prior to taking on that position and producing and executive producing? Has anything changed for you along the way in doing that, that you may have not noticed before, having just been around it?
Oh, you know what? Let's see what happens when it comes to making our final sales. So
Uh,
that's a whole other aspect of it. Right now, I'm so focused on getting the post production done,
right.
getting the score done, the sound done. We're very close on the western.
Right.
So, but I have a lot of faith in our main producer because produced so many films and sold them very successfully throughout the world. And we've already got very strong prospects for our distribution. So I'm not worried about that at this point. Just
Interesting.
really looking forward to getting onto the horror film next. That's going to be fun to score. Completely different from what I did with the Western here. But yeah, so it's exciting to be behind the camera a little bit and then in front of the keyboards.
I've always been curious with composers too when it comes to their the perspective on how, in this case for yourself, like how the industry has changed from when you first got into it, because you were actually more or less kind of born into it in a lot of ways, but as you've seen the years of the amount of changes that the industry has gone through, one of the biggest changes is streaming. That's one of the biggest impact that the industry has felt, where theaters at certain points felt like it was not going to sustain itself long enough because of the streaming platforms were dominating at certain points, and then obviously COVID happening and shutting down a lot of things for a long period of time, and then concern for people going back into theaters. Is that going to be a thing anymore? Now that everyone's been staying at home for such a long period of time, you being a part of that from pretty early on and where you are with it now, do you feel any sort of do you have a lot of confidence that despite what the changes that have occurred, that the industry is still going to be very much it's going to change for the better in terms of how things are being put together now, and how people are able to create their own content more without having to go to the major studios, or they can kind of do it themselves and get their distribution through somebody else? Like, is there a little bit of that perspective has changed for you along the way from when you had first started?
Yeah, you know what? I'm feeling like the opportunities for independent filmmakers have actually expanded with all of the streaming. And of course, over the last 2 years, there was such a lull in the creation of content that now people that have had a couple of productions like we did shooting during COVID, I think we got to jump on things. But we've also got an incredible variety of places where we can market the films. Streaming here in the United States, theatrical abroad, streaming abroad. I think there may be even more opportunities. Now, it's very different. When streaming first started becoming very prevalent in the last 5 years, I was very worried that it would affect royalties for composers because broadcast paid on a higher scale than anything. And Netflix, when it first started, was not paying very much, but deals have been renegotiated, and I'm making more in royalties now than I ever have. And the sheets for all of the different markets and streaming, I mean, it's ridiculous. It goes on forever. You get these royalty sheets that are 30 pages long. So I'm actually encouraged at this point. So
interesting. But
I do have a film coming out next month. I believe it's either March or April, called Tyson's Run, and that's going to be in theaters all across America. That's starring Amy Smart.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that movie. Yeah, and the trailer's already out, isn't it?
I believe the trailer's out. Yeah,
I think I saw the trailer.
So that's theatrical, and then I just saw the numbers. We've got quite a few. We've got hundreds of theaters in North America, but then we've got more in South America and Central and South America. So hundreds down there as well. So it's exciting.
Interesting.
And that'll be one of the true first fully theatrical films that I've been involved with in a while. So excited about that.
So it's going through that experience and having this film coming out in the very near future, because I do recall seeing that trailer, now that you brought it up here. But do you have how you handle that, or how being a part of that process there, does that give you perspective of how you may want to handle certain things differently when it comes to other projects that you're working on, when it comes to that aspect? Or because I know you mentioned before, one of the main producers has good relationships with these distributors that are going to be potentially releasing the movie through all these different markets here. Are you kind of getting your hands on that aspect of it too, or you just simply do worked in one facet of the producing side of it and let someone else handle the other aspect of it that you don't have, so you can focus your energy on other areas?
Yeah, no, I'm not involved in the distribution. We've got some really experienced people that have released some really interesting films. One of our co-producers on the horror film that we did was the producer of Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah,
Bone,
I know
to-
that movie. Yeah,
Bone Tomahawk. It was a really interesting, like, horror western,
yeah.
and he's been involved in some really great films throughout the years. So I'm leaving the distribution up to those experienced guys.
As I mentioned in the beginning before, that I had become a fan once I started watching Jesse's films, and then coming back to revisit his work over and over again. You know, I've taken notice on other things he's done along the way too, including your composition here. So, you know, when I had reached out to you, as I said before, I try to do my research with whoever I'm talking to because I want to avoid asking the same questions. So I I cannot say nothing but great things of what my experience has been with you because quite frankly, I'm very curious to hear every person's perspective on the industry. In this case, you being a composer, I've always want to know what that's like for a person to do what they do in one part of the industry where you are the key ingredient to what makes the film very successful in terms of the person's experience in watching the film. Because for a lot of the films I've come across with Jesse with your composition, it certainly adds that enjoyment factor, in my opinion, when it comes to what you've done here. So, you know, for you to share this insight for me is very important. It's also very interesting, and I'm hoping that whomever comes across this here will also take in consideration what you have said and hopefully get a different perspective about how the industry works from your position there, but also how you've been branching off to other things as well too, and see how you've been able to transition from what it looks like you're pretty successfully in having your films be released in the very near future. So, if anything, I want to say thank you very much for giving me your time to converse with me and also for answering my questions. And I am a fan of your work as a result of what I've come across here in the last few years here. So, again, I can't thank you enough for giving me the time out of your day to speak with me on this here.
Absolute pleasure, Robert. You know what? You ask really interesting questions, pertinent questions, and you're a good interviewer, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's very nice of you to say. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it to it here. But again, I do thank you again for your time. And I'm looking forward to see the upcoming project you have coming out here down the pipeline. And I'm hoping that I can do a review for the films as well, too. So that way people will be able to look out for the works, the films you've been producing here. And hopefully that will hopefully be able to expand on that part of your career as well, too. But otherwise, you enjoy the rest of your day here and you be safe out there.
And you and I will talk about White Elephant after that comes out. I think you'll really enjoy it.
I can't wait to see it. I'm looking forward to that as well, too. But otherwise, you enjoy the rest of your day here, sir.
All right. Cheers, man.
Cheers.